are patients that are coming in who are having difficulty with sheltering in place, adjusting to sheltering in place, as well as when they are returning to work, what does that mean for them? We have a lot of individuals that may directly or indirectly interface in healthcare related professions, and they are experiencing a variety of stressors and concerns about their own health and the health of their families, as well as being able to serve others. So this is a phenomenon that we have seen since the beginning of March, and we are, as psychologists, we're dedicated to conducting research about this in terms of how well we can respond to the psychological needs for support of our patients. So Tina, I'm wondering if you can give me permission to forward the PowerPoint.
All you have to do is say next, so I know, and I can.
Okay,
do it for you.
that's okay. Am I allowed to share my screen, because of that? It might be easier for me to do that. Is that okay?
Are you able to on your side?
I think so. I'll try it.
Okay.
Very quickly. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yep, you're good.
Wonderful. Okay. So what we have seen is what we call COVID-19 related distress. And it is very similar to symptoms that we see in anxiety, as well as after an acute stressful incident. So we have what we call physiological hyperarousal. And I think it's a really important element to talk about because it is a fear response, and it's in response to us feeling threatened. Whether the threat is real or imagined, we begin to experience anxiety and physiological symptoms. We see a lot of this in the primary care center today. And so some symptoms may be racing heart, startling easily, and constant worry. And patients will report that they have a fear of the illness, of losing a loved one, or a loss of income. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And the anxiety actually manifests itself in physiological symptoms. So this is, not to be funny, but really when you think about a cat who is frightened, the cat will arch its back. It's preparing itself for fight or flight. And this is actually what our bodies do when we are feeling threatened and we're experiencing anxiety and panic. So some of the COVID distress is related to adjustment to sheltering in place. The healthcare workforce, they express ambivalence about returning to work. Adjustment to reopening, so that even when we think we are going back to what we might have considered normal, people may experience anxiety about going back to the workplace or resuming various activities. Parental and grandparental responsibilities are increased due to children and grandchildren being at home. So that is a stressor in terms of learning how to manage one's home again. And especially if everyone is working from home or they are in home for extended periods of time. And someone needs to mute themselves. Another issue will be grandparents expressing that they really miss seeing their grandchildren, that being separated from them is quite difficult. Our social relationships have been altered. Maybe we're not meeting a friend for tea or coffee, or we're not able to go out to dinner as much as we normally would have. Physical activity may be limited because we're not going to the gym and we have to find alternatives. So we're really rethinking how we engage in previously enjoyable and significant activities. And these activities are quite significant. Things like weddings, birthdays, baptism, graduations, events where we would have normally joined as a group and shared our joy in the special event. And now we're not able to do that. So there are a set of researchers who are very interested in how coronavirus related anxiety impacts us. And they recently developed this scale. Now, this is really not for self-use. If you feel like you do need to speak with a professional, there are resources at the end of this PowerPoint, and I would recommend accessing them. So it's really not a matter of you self-diagnosing, but just to be aware of what the symptoms of anxiety might look like. So one symptom could be that a person is actually dizzy, lightheaded, or faint when they read or listen to news about the coronavirus. So this relates to being exposed to social media and being saturated with so much information about it. Trouble falling or staying asleep because the person was thinking about the coronavirus. Feeling paralyzed or frozen when they thought about or were exposed to information about the coronavirus. And then noticing a loss of interest in eating when they were, again, thinking about the coronavirus or being exposed to social media that was covering the virus. Feeling nauseous or had stomach problems when I thought or was exposed to information about the coronavirus. So something I want to highlight here is
Dr. Anna, you are on mute.
I've unmuted again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we want to be careful about our social media diet during this pandemic because exposure to too much information and constant information is really overwhelming. So some things that we've learned about COVID-19 distress is that social isolation measures for some people may actually decrease their coronavirus-related anxiety. And what that means is that if you're feeling as if you have a sense of control, then you may feel or think that your life is a bit more predictable. It's the idea of not having predictability and structure that can actually increase anxiety. So in one COVID-19 distress research study, they found that patients and participants who reported that they We create a mindset which differentiates between what one can control and what one cannot control. Anxiety becomes perpetuated and fueled when we allow our minds to focus on the things that are really out of our control. So in session with patients and clients, we really want to help steer them towards thinking about the elements in their environment and in themselves that they can control. Using it for a time for reflection. I have a patient who talks about pondering on the porch, and she has designated her morning time from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. to sip her tea on the porch of the home and to journal. And that is something that she would have not done previously, but she finds that she savors it and it helps her start her day on a good note, and it's a good way for her to launch the day and to start on the right foot, if you will. There are some things that resilience is not, and it doesn't mean that a person won't experience difficulty or distress. It doesn't mean that it's absent from our lives. We still experience distress and difficulty, but it's the way that we manage it. The road to resilience might involve some considerable emotional distress at times. So I'd like for you to take a moment and to think about examples of resilient individuals. Think of someone in your life who you would describe as resilient, or think of a famous individual who exemplified resilience. So an example here, it's a de-identified client, a woman that I had known for many years, 55-year-old woman who lost her sister to an aggressive form of cancer. She took her pain and suffering and used it to create a nonprofit organization supporting family members who lost a loved one due to cancer. So that's an example of a resilient activity and really transcending the adverse event. And it is creating that and using it, if you will, for the greater good. So for a moment of reflection, thinking about Anne Frank, and a quote from her, "I still believe in spite of everything that people are really good at heart." That's an example of a mindset of positivity in the face of adversity. So elements of resilience and what it takes to actually develop it. It takes time and intentionality and reflection and thinking about how we start our day each morning and what we are going to choose to give our emotional energy to. There are 4 components: connection, meaning that we establish and maintain good relationships with others. We reach out for support. We reach out to spend time with other human beings. And they want to live a meaningful life. So they are invested in showing the world the best version of themselves and developing themselves. They want to grow their capacities for love and compassion, creativity and curiosity, work and resilience, and integrity and wisdom. So 2 very important leaders in the field of positive psychology, and we are talking about the elements of positive psychology here, are Martin and leading authority of positive psychology, resilience, learned helplessness, depression, optimism, and pessimism. He has a positive psychology, authentic happiness website, which I will share with you at the end of the presentation here. And what Dr. Seligman found was that he's been the Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Management at Claremont Graduate University and the former head of the Department of Psychology at the University of Chicago. And what Dr. Csikszentmihalyi studied were the lives of artists and, again, individuals who had overcome adversity. And he discovered that there are some human beings that can immerse themselves in activities to the point where they're in a heightened state of joy and engagement. So I wanted to share with you Dr. Seligman's theory of well-being so that you'd have a better understanding of the kinds of strategies and interventions that we use as psychologists to address COVID-19 related distress and depression. So what is human flourishing and what enables it? Dr. Seligman developed what was called the Perma theory of well-being, and it's his attempt to answer these fundamental questions. He identified 5 building blocks that enable flourishing and enable us to live a very good life, if you will. And he identified the ability to experience positive emotion, engagement in activities and engagement with other human beings, engagement in the world that's larger than us, the ability to sustain good relationships, and the ability to find meaning in our existence. Why are we here? Why do we pursue a particular vocation in our lives? And accomplishment. What is the role of accomplishment in our lives, and how does that create a sense of well-being? And he also found that there were techniques to increase these different elements. So Perma consists of engagement, relationships, positive emotion, establishing meaning in our lives, and working towards accomplishment. So with positive emotion, we can actually increase our positive emotion about the past. And one technique that we do is we help our patients cultivate gratitude and the quality of forgiveness. We can cultivate positive emotion about the present by savoring physical pleasures and mindfulness, living in the moment, and our positive emotion about the future, building hope and optimism. So with positive emotion, we may be thinking about feeling gratitude, feeling forgiveness, feeling joy, feeling happiness, feeling cheerful, feeling excited and looking forward to an activity, feeling fondness for someone that we have loved in our lives. So a few strategies that we use with our patients are positive emotion strategies. And one strategy is, at the end of the day, keeping a journal and documenting at bedtime 3 things which went well during the day. So when we are anxious and depressed, our mind may automatically focus upon everything that we thought went wrong, all of our disappointments. But what we're doing is we're training our minds to actually find the truth. And the truth is that there will be things in our day that actually did go well. What Dr. Seligman found in his research was that participants who did this and engaged in activity over a 3-month period reported lower depression scores. So this is something that someone can do where they don't have to be engaged in formal therapy, but they can do this at home. Then the exercise of gratitude. So an example is to make a list of the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we are grateful for every day. Another activity is identifying an individual who helped us in our lives. Was it a mentor? Was it a dear neighbor? Was it an old friend? Was it a family member? Sitting down and actually constructing a letter of gratitude and why we are grateful to them for how they helped us. And then actually delivering the letter in some form. A smaller version of this is actually the action of just writing a thank you note and thanking someone for their kindness to us. Engagement means that we fully deploy our skills, our strengths, and attention for a challenging task. And Dr. Csikszentmihalyi identified the experience called flow, which is one that is so gratifying that people are willing to do it for its own sake rather than for what they will get out of it. And the activity is a reward in and of itself. So activities which can promote engagement and our full attention can be something like learning to play an instrument, listening to music, learning a new craft, be it knitting, maybe engaging in carpentry work, reading, or setting our sights on learning a new skill, maybe taking voice lessons or being part of a choir. But these activities force us to be in the here and now. So what we're doing is we're turning off the preoccupied anxiety portion of our brains, and we're focusing on the activity in the present moment. And that actually will enhance our mood and bring about a positive mood and derail us from anxiety. And so the way to describe this is that the concentration is fully absorbed in the moment. So if you think about if you had to ever fix a bike or something at home, or riding a bike, doing gardening, sports training, maybe you are engaged in a senior fitness program and you're engaged in weight training for seniors, if you will. We give 100% of our attention to these activities. Self-awareness disappears. And the perception of time is distorted, and in retrospect, time stops. If you think about, you've had a good conversation with someone that you really love dearly, and maybe you shared a cup of coffee or some tea, and the time just flew by. That's an example of engagement. A work task that you've completed. I've had some patients tell me that they start a work project at home. They've decided that they were going to reorganize a room, or they were going to repaint a room. And they became so engrossed in the activity that they really lost track of time. And then at the end of the activity, they experienced very good feelings of accomplishment. Another example is playing a musical instrument, reading a book, writing or journaling, or even building furniture. Relationships are another fundamental aspect of PERMA and well-being. Being connected with other human beings is fundamental to our well-being. These are experiences, when we have experiences to contribute to well-being, are often amplified through our relationships. So what that means is that if we've graduated or something good has happened to us, there's been a birth of a grandchild, the positive feelings that are associated with those events, they're amplified when we can share them with others. We call a friend on the phone and we say, I really want to share with you this wonderful thing that happened to me today. There is a new baby in the family, there's a new grandchild, or my grandson has just graduated college. When we share those things with other people, we are really improving our mood. Connections to others can give life purpose and meaning, and support from and connection with others is one of the best antidotes to the downs of life. So for instance, if you followed some of the social media and Facebook posts in Italy during the time of pandemic, and you've seen the Facebook posts of Italians actually singing from their balconies. So coming together and being connected. It can be something as simple as you live in a senior high rise and maybe you've run out of sugar one day and you want to practice physical and social distancing, but you call upon your neighbor for help. And that creates a good bond. Doing acts of kindness for others produces an increase in well-being. So one thing that I've started doing is that I live in a close-knit community in a small area in Center City. And we have several families that live on our block. And before I'm ready to go shopping every week, I call everyone and ask them, is there something that I can pick up at the store for you? And that helps me feel connected to my neighbors and that I'm actually being of help to them. There's an evolutionary perspective to remaining socially connected. The drive to connect with and serve others promotes our survival. And we see this in the animal kingdom, where we have pockets of foxes of dens, if you will, and the pride of lions, if you will. They're together and they help each other. Developing strong relationships is central to adaptation and is enabled by our capacity for love, compassion, kindness, empathy, teamwork, cooperation, and self-sacrifice. So those are things that we are really capable of. And when we tap into those attributes, we're really growing as human beings. We want to cultivate connection through relationships. So something that I've observed in patients reporting this is that people are staying home now and they're cooking more. They're developing their culinary skills, if you will, and they're sitting down and they're eating as a family, which is really, really important. If we think about when we were working, or those of us that are still working, if we were outside in the environment all day, sometimes having that family meal at the end of the day didn't occur. Another aspect is meaning, a sense of meaning and purpose derived from belonging to and serving something bigger than ourselves. There are various societal institutions that enable a sense of meaning, such as religion, family, science, politics, work organizations, justice, the community, and social causes. So an example might, again, being part of a religious institution. And even in our religious institutions and churches, there are various committees and organizations that allow us to serve others and to be of help. Accomplishment is another dimension. An accomplishment is a dimension that does not stop when we are 60 years old and above. And it's something that I encourage in my patients. I have a 70-year-old patient who actually wants to go back to school, and she has an application for a virtual online learning program. And I've encouraged her to move forward with that because that's going to promote a feeling of accomplishment. People pursue achievement, competence, success, and mastery for its own sake in a variety of domains, including the workplace, sports, games, and hobbies. These are things that we may do at home. An example is in the Ukrainian culture, we have a very strong focus on our ethnic identity through learning embroidery patterns and promoting textiles. So an important thing for not just women, but men to do is actually to learn how to do embroidery. And it's an art form. And we have clusters of these circles where we embroider together and we develop this skill. And the embroidery is part of our community and what we share with each other. People pursue accomplishment even when it does not necessarily lead to positive emotion, meaning, or relationships. People do this just for the sake of doing it. They want to get better at it. An example might be, I'm speaking with a client or a friend of mine who says, I can't believe it, I spent 3 hours knitting the other day and I lost track of time. So what are the benefits of well-being? So this really expands beyond ourselves and the present moment when we're engaged in these activities. People that have a better sense of well-being have better work performance. They report more satisfying relationships in their lives. They become more cooperative. They have stronger immune systems, better physical health. They live longer. There's reduced cardiovascular mortality, fewer sleep problems, lower levels of burnout, greater sense of self-control, better self-regulation and coping abilities, and they're more pro-social, so that they look at themselves as part of a larger connection in the universe, if you will. So we talk about a life worth living, and this is really an important dimension in positive psychology. We start by determining which values are most important to you. Is it spirituality? Is it family? Is it your civic responsibility? Is it your physical health? Is it learning? And then we determine which activities represent these values. We commit to engaging in at least one activity per day. And so, for instance, maybe we've determined that we really want improved health, and good physical health is an important value to us. And so you'll have some patients talk about they want to be in the best physical health because they want to, when the pandemic is over, they want to be around their grandchildren. They want to be involved in the lives of their grandchildren or their children. So perhaps we have the value of improved health, and then we commit to doing things like walking, biking, planning healthy meals, cooking a healthy meal with a loved one. So spending time with a loved one, if you will. So some examples of developing or tapping into our values and then structuring activities that are consistent with that and serve the purpose of living those values might be: we identify that family is important. We prepare and eat a meal together as family, or we make a point of talking to family members on the phone. Spirituality, attending religious services, engaging in prayer and reflection. And we actually make time to do that. We don't say that we just, we have a value of spirituality, but we actually make time to do these things. Physical health, doing things like exercise, walking, biking, self-development and learning, enrolling in a virtual class, learning to play an instrument, cultivating, learning, planting a garden, if you will, and taking time for reflection. So as we end, I wanted to spend some time just sharing with you some positive psychology resources. And this is the actual link to the website for the University of Pennsylvania, their Authentic Happiness website, if you will. It's a wonderful portal where you can go online and actually establish sort of an anonymous login and become a member. And there are all sorts of assessments that one can take. You can have access to positive psychology blogs on a daily basis and articles, if you will. Very good reading material is the Book of Authentic Happiness, Using the New Positive Psychology to Realize Your Potential for Lasting Fulfillment. And that was written by Dr. Martin Seligman. That is only one of their publications. Another one is the Psychology of Flow, which again was written by Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And this is a link to the website and the book. He has written many, many books on how do we promote this idea of flow in our lives? How do we create this feeling of being absorbed in activities where we actually lose sense of time? And we then have a feeling of accomplishment and this feeling of joy and engagement. The Pennsylvania Psychological Association, our website is www.papsi.org. There are very specific links on community resources and PDFs on managing anxiety during COVID. There are also links to PDFs and summary topics on how to talk to our children and grandchildren about COVID-19 when children are experiencing distress. And what I do want to mention as well is that if you do go on to the Philadelphia College of Osteopathics website, we have a link to what's called the Happiness Protocol. And that's a group that we run on promoting happiness in our lives. That is written by, it is run by Dr. Scott Glassman. And if you wanted to learn more about that, you could actually access the website. So in summary, during this time of COVID-19 distress, we want to focus on self-soothing activities. We want to be aware that our bodies can actually go into physiological hyperarousal, where we have an elevated heart rate. We may feel muscle tension in our bodies. Sometimes we even get sweaty palms, and we want to take control of that. So what we do is we learn how to self-soothe, be it through yoga, meditation, taking a hot bath, practicing stretching exercises or progressive muscle relaxation or diaphragmatic breathing. We limit social media and exposure to media, and we want to create a social media diet that's not going to overwhelm us. So it's important to stay up to date with our wellness and CDC guidelines and what is emerging currently, but we want to do it in small doses, and we want to be careful about how much that we're taking in on social media. We adhere to a daily schedule, and again, structure helps us to feel secure. As a former teacher, I can tell you that when I worked with students, when I provided them a structure, they felt much more secure in their learning. And I think that it's an element that we can take with us in our middle-aged years and our senior years. To have structure really promotes our sense of security, and we want to promote that on a daily basis. Exercise is excellent in terms of combating COVID-19 distress and anxiety and depression in general. Connecting with our loved ones, and our loved ones don't necessarily, they can be our biological family, if you will, but also our larger family. Are there folks in our church that we want to connect with? Are there individuals in our physical community that we want to connect with? So we stay connected with them. And then engaging in meaningful activities. Do we continue to volunteer even during the time of COVID-19 and distress? Do we reach out to other people? If we can, do we volunteer to bring groceries to neighbors? And, you know, we're wearing our mask and our gloves and we're being safe about it. We acknowledge that we're not living in isolation, and that we really are part of the larger plan, and we're connected to a larger community, if you will. So I'm going to escape from the PowerPoint, and I'd like to take this time, if there is time, to answer any questions, if you will.
All right, Dr. Zinchenko, I don't see any questions as of now, but let's give everybody a few minutes since you just finished up to kind of type them into the chat box. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box now, and we'll have a few minute Q&A here. Great job. Good job sharing your own slides. It's much easier that way, isn't it?
Thank you for your support, Tina.
Of course. I don't see any questions. I don't know if you want to stay on for a few minutes and see if any come through.
I can stay. I'm more than happy to stay on for a few minutes. I want to thank you all for allowing me to join you this morning. I hope the information was helpful. And I just want to encourage everyone to take care of themselves during this time of uncertainty, and know that there are resources out there to connect and to help us all feel better, if you will, and navigate this very challenging time. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
And you can hear it. She can.
All right, and feel free to use the chat box as the presentation goes on, and any questions that may arise, we can send them her way, or hopefully she'll stay on and answer them for the next few minutes.
Shall we take a 10-minute break? Can you hear me? Let's take a 10-minute break. Just stretch our legs, take a bio break, and come back at 10 past 11. That was really a wonderful and dense presentation, Dr. Zakharchenko. There was so much in it. And if it's okay with you, I would love to share your slides with people so they can actually go to the websites and so on. And we are recording this, so that could serve as a resource for people. Really, there was so much in there that, being a mental health professional myself, I found it hard to keep up. It was so rich and.
Okay. So please do, please keep the slides for reference later on. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I will distribute it to the pastors and the senior group coordinators so that they can, provide it to the members. And of course at EPGS as well. So because those websites and other resources would be very hard to access while the talk is going on. I often try to take pictures of that, but that doesn't work because the link doesn't work. So we will provide the slides and the recording. Just an afterthought, and I should have done this right in the beginning. I just want to let everybody know that today's seminar is brought to you by Keystone Clinical Studies, which is my research clinical trials company, and the Eastern Pennsylvania Geriatric Society. Eileen Warner-Maron is the executive director from there, and Tina Chu also works in the office at Keystone at EPGS. And of course, the Marthoma Church North American Diocese, the Regional Advisory Committee, and many of the individual members in each church who have done a lot to bring people together. Thank you all so much, and I hope we can, I know we will all benefit from this, and let's meet again at 10 past 11. Dr. Amit Ganguly, an infectious disease specialist, will come and share his experiences and some scientific information on the medical aspects of COVID-19. So let's meet in about 8 minutes.
Hello, everyone. We are taking a short break and we'll return in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
The lines around my eyes and my mouth. It's so exciting. And the personal stories.
Tina, shall we get going?
Ready whenever you are.
Amit, are you on? Dr. Ganguly? All right, everybody, let's try and get back together. I hope you're back at your computers. We're waiting for Dr. Amit Ganguly, who is a graduate of the Armed Forces Medical College in Pune, India, and trained, I believe, in the University of Pittsburgh. He's a good personal friend, a tremendous storyteller and raconteur, and a very experienced physician. He is rounding as we speak in hospitals due to the COVID-19 crisis, and I'm just waiting for him to come on board.
I believe you just entered.
Dr. Ganguly does not have any slides, so he will be speaking as soon as we can get him online. As I said, he is seeing patients right now.
Yeah, hi. Cherry, I'm on. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Amit Gangoli. I do infectious diseases. I've been in private practice in the greater Philadelphia area now, essentially, in the Phoenix, Old Pottstown, and Einstein, Montgomery areas for about 10 years. It's been a very interesting time with COVID-19, as you all are probably aware, with dealing with the pandemic, the likes of which we never thought that we would actually experience, even in the field of infectious diseases. So it has been a real challenge. I think part of the reason I didn't even bother with slides is the data with COVID-19 has been changing, almost on a daily, if not weekly basis. And slides as well as, updates, whether it's from the WHO or the CDC, are constantly being updated, as you're probably aware. So a little bit of epidemiology, or a little bit of, background. The virus is basically an RNA virus. It's a respiratory virus in the family of what we call coronaviruses. It's a beta-2 coronavirus. We believe that it probably, was a zoonotic infection, which basically means coming from an animal or a mammal. And bats have been the suspected reservoir because they have two bat viruses that are very similar to the coronavirus. And it was probably a mutation in one of them that allowed it to jump from a mammalian host to humans, presumably in some of the live wet markets in Wuhan province, China. Actually, the city of Wuhan, which is in Hubei province, is where this first came about and, was detected in December of 2019. And hence the initial term was, SARS coronavirus 2, but they called it a novel virus because it was a new virus to humans. The second concern, was the potential for a pandemic existed if you then had human-to-human transmission. And once that occurred, you essentially satisfied the criteria for the potential to expand to a pandemic, which we now find ourselves in. In its background, the virus actually is molecularly most similar to what used to be MERS, which was Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus Syndrome, or MERS, which was another kind of, coronavirus. And you may have heard of SARS, which was the initial one. And that's why this is called SARS, coronavirus 2, because it was different from the SARS that hit in Toronto and parts of, Hong Kong in the early 2000s. So one of the concerns we've had is just being the ability to, rapidly transmit this infection from one person to another. And over the, last 4 months, I'm sure all of you have been inundated with, information both on, news channels as well as cable, as well as WhatsApp Academy, as I call it. But essentially, it is a highly transmissible virus. We still are trying to figure out what we call the R0, R0, which is basically the ability or the potential for the virus to be transmitted from one index case. How many new patients or persons can one person have the potential to infect? And sort of put that in perspective, the R0, or the ability for, a person who has influenza and spreading it to another person, is 0.1. This is approximately, if nothing, at least 10 to 20 times more transmissible than influenza. SARS, which was, the initial one that we had several years ago, had a R0 of 2.5. That meant one person could infect 2.5 other people. And that's when you really worry about the, potential for it to spread very rapidly. Right now, the problem with, our COVID-19 is that we really still are underestimating the actual numbers. So if you say that about 16 million people globally have been infected and over 4.5 million in the US, we believe that there's probably at least 10 times that number that are actually have been infected and were probably minimally symptomatic or largely asymptomatic. So the R0 for SARS, we believe, may be closer to about 2 or 2.5 when, all the data is eventually analyzed. Now, the epidemiology in terms of, the symptoms of how this manifests, the incubation period is believed to be somewhere in the range of 2 to 14 days. And so that's why the key concern for most people is, well, if I get infected, two questions arise. Number one, what is the time period that I am actually most contagious or infectious, if you will, to people in my family, right? Close contacts, friends, people who visit me. We generally believe that the period for maximum infectivity is actually in the first 2 days prior. It's actually like about 2.3 days prior to actually becoming symptomatic, and about 0.7 days, or like probably the day before you actually start manifesting symptoms, is actually the period of maximum infectivity, and can progress to another 6 days after you're symptomatic. But that initial window is the period of maximum infectivity. And I mention this because that raises all these next questions about, if I do get infected, how long do I quarantine thereafter? The recommendations for quarantine still remain, ideally 10 days. I'm sorry? Was there a question there? I'm sorry? Okay. The period of maximum infectivity generally, we talked about, but the period of, quarantine is still, 10 to 14 days. It's increasingly being shortened, especially in healthcare workers. We believe rather than, progressing to a test-based strategy of quarantining, we go to a symptom-based strategy, which means it's at least 10 days of, being off after being your first symptoms. It's 10 days of being, from there on, as well as at least 24 hours of having no fever without the use of any medicines like Tylenol or ibuprofen to sort of mask your fever. Treatments have become increasingly more effective. I mean, I look at the first month of, the pandemic, at least in the Northeast, where it was very, very rough for us here, especially in Montgomery County, which was probably the epicenter in this part of Philadelphia, at least. And we had a lot of people, who were the older folks who actually, or people who were immune suppressed, who actually did very poorly. The treatment modalities really right now include, obviously, use of supplemental oxygen. We can progress to, ventilators in our sickest individuals. One of the big, advances in the last couple of months has been the increased use of steroids in people with, mild to moderately severe disease, which has really had about, I would say, a 30% improvement in overall outcomes. We do have this drug that you probably heard Dr. Fauci discuss, and in many of the COVID updates and daily briefings, called remdesivir, Remdesivir. This is an antiviral medicine that basically, I call it in a way, think about it like a intravenous version of Tamiflu that we have for influenza. It is an antiviral that actually hasn't really been quite the miracle drug you thought it would be, but it definitely has decreased inpatient hospital stay from about 15 days to about 11 days. And we've learned to sort of start it fairly early. The good news is that the shortages that we experienced earlier are no longer there right now. Supply chains seem to be, adequate, and we have, adequate stores and supply of remdesivir for our inpatients. We generally tend to use it, fairly easily. If you buy yourself a hospital bed and you're requiring moderate amounts of oxygen, we will give you remdesivir if you have no contraindications to that. Other treatments we're using are anti-inflammatory medicines. These are like some of the big guns that we've used for treating some rheumatological diseases in the past. Because one of the things that we saw with people who got very sick from COVID-19 infection was this concept of something called Cytokine Storm, which is basically an inflammatory cascade where you have a whole bunch of inflammatory markers that progressed, and sort of it's like a fire burning out of control. And so we've used those as well. They're intravenous medicines that we use to try and decrease the inflammation. And the last thing that I've actually, used with some, good effect has been Convalescent Plasma, which is basically you type and screen a patient's for his blood type and blood group, and then we basically are giving them antibody infusions from people who've actually had COVID-19 and have recovered. And the one thing I would say for, when I've been doing some town halls and other, updates on COVID in the community outreach, is to really emphasize to, all of you out there, God forbid you should get the infection, but if you should, and if you have, recovery, I would encourage you after 28 days have passed from your diagnosis to actually contact your local blood bank or the Red Cross. or the Keystone Miller blood banks, and see if you can donate a couple of pints of plasma, because that would be really, really life-saving potentially for somebody out there. Finally, I guess there are questions that often come up about reopenings and how can I safely go about my daily routine. One of the things that we've really learned over the last 4 months of this has been two things. Number one, the initial concerns about transmission of COVID-19 from inanimate objects, so what we call fomites, like surfaces, doorknobs, towels, etc., has been far overestimated initially. The bigger concern right now has been the potential for COVID-19 to basically spread through aerosolized droplets in the air. Generally, droplets are small particles, usually 5 microns or less, of that are aerosolized in a mist, if you will, when people cough, sneeze, or sing or talk loudly. And they can remain generally in the air, we believe, for up to a few hours in some cases. But for the most part, it's really, you have to be within 6 feet of that person to be able to get it, because you inhale those droplets. And that's why the use of a simple surgical face mask, as well as N95 respirators in the hospital side, if you actually are taking care of a patient in close contact, is mandatory and really is strongly advised. Lastly, I would say the best things you can really do are continue to socially distance, mask, and wash your hands religiously after you touch any objects that might have been contaminated. And what we say, stay away from your mouth, eyes, and nose. So those are those portals of entry for the virus. That's more or less what I have. I mean, we can talk a lot about what we expect in the future. I have 2 college-going sons who are starting, and heading back to college, in about 3 or 4 weeks. And everyone probably is going to be, tested prior to going to school. They will probably have some degree of a quarantine bubble within campuses, I expect. Individual school districts, I'm sure, will have their own kind of concerns and what they want to do. But other than that, I think one thing I really want to reassure the general public out there is that from a case fatality ratio perspective, I think COVID-19 infection will probably end up having a case fatality rate, we believe, of somewhere in the less than 1%, because, as I said, I think we have vastly underestimated the total number of cases out there. So that being said, thank you all for your attention, and I don't know if there's time for a couple of questions. I'm more than happy to answer that, Cherry.
Thank you, Amit. That was really excellent. Everything you wanted to know about COVID-19 and our personal and social commitments and protections in one 10-minute wrap up. I don't see any questions as such, and if there are any that come up later, maybe I can.
Actually, one just did pop up.
Great.
So the question is the virus now in a category of airborne spread at long distance?
At all distance?
Long.
Is that?
At long distance?
No. As of now, the distance of viral spread is still 6 feet, because it has to be aerosolized in that area. You cannot forcefully expectorate or sneeze beyond that area. It's interesting because it's a good point. I think the concern was raised more where there was some recent data that suggested that in closed spaces, the virus could sort of remain in the air and sort of remain there for up to a few hours. We have not seen that actually in many healthcare workers in particular, because we are in hospital environments that often, if you will, air conditioned, sealed, and closed off. And there's often been concern raised about that. So no, as far as I can reassure you that it is still generally 6 feet. The bigger concern actually is not just the distance, but also the time that someone spends in close contact. And actually, increasingly, the time the greatest risk, what we define as a close contact or a high risk exposure, is if you've been within 6 feet of an infected patient for more than 15 minutes. That seems to be the key amount of time. So no, it is not, expectorated or aerosolized at long distances beyond 6 feet.
Great, thank you. That's the last question I see at this moment.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Amit.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. I guess it's me now. Tina, can you get my slides up? Can you make it into a full screen? That's better. Well, it's been a very exciting and informative. Can you go back? Yeah. Morning. And my name is Cherian Verghese. I'm known in the church and family circles as Prakash. So that's my alter ego, as it were. I'm the principal investigator at Keystone Clinical Studies. Can you go back? Which is an independent clinical trial site. We have helped to bring 10 new medicines to the field of psychiatry and neurology, and we are deeply committed to Alzheimer's disease research. There are medicines in clinical trials that promise to prevent Alzheimer's disease and stop the downslide, which is really very exciting. Those who know me from a family perspective are aware that my own mother passed away from Alzheimer's disease a few years ago, and Reverend Kuruvula was the person who conducted her funeral service. So a disclosure where I'm talking about clinical depression in Asian communities and COVID-19. My disclosure is that I do conduct clinical trials for people who have major depressive disorder. Let's go to the next slide. So the objectives, I'll try and get this as best as I can within 15 minutes to understand mind-body relationships or mind-brain relationships. Anna had talked about how the way we feel affects our brain and vice versa. Some aspects of being Indian or Asian in the way we respond to psychological distress. I am board certified in India, UK, and here, so I do have a kind of round the world perspective on this. I'll talk a little bit about what we call clinical depression or major depressive disorder. And this is not just feeling sad for a few hours. This is a medical condition. I'll talk about the effects of depression on physical health, families, and the community, and remediation, what we can do about it. Next slide, please. I always start my talks with this picture. You all know this is the creation story as painted by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. From the time I was a kid, I wondered, of course, God is the one on the right. What is that purple cloak or cloud that God is sitting in? If you look at it deeply, you'll realize, next slide. No, yes, that this is actually the human brain front to back, from the nose to the back of your head in the midline. So Michelangelo, nearly 400 years ago, put God in the human brain. And I see that, as a kind of a metaphorical symbol, metaphysical symbol in a way. When you say made in his own image, that the human brain, in some ways, is the embodiment of all that is wonderful, unknowable, godly, mysterious. Just a few fun facts about the brain. We have 100,000 miles of high fidelity cabling in our brains, over 1 million gigabytes of memory, and maybe 100 billion neurons or nerve cells in the brain. So this is, at some levels, something that we cannot even start to understand. And at other levels, it is still an organ. It is still a machine, just vastly complicated. I just want to go back to the idea of what Dr. Anna talked about. about the importance of social connectivity. What we have found in neuroscience is something called mirror, like the mirror you look in, mirror neurons. You could look it up. It's strange, something that we have found lately, that about 15% of the brain cells we have are dedicated to our mirror neurons that are dedicated to social connectivity. And when you say I'm starved for company, that literally means that your mirror neurons are not getting enough stimulation. And that's one of the areas that COVID-19 has directly affected us. So in many ways, we are wired for social connectivity, for being with people, for being with family. And this unusual situation that we are in affects that. And we have to find ways to recognize and acknowledge that and find ways to mitigate it. So the point here is that in many ways, the brain is an organ, like the heart, like your liver, and there are brain diseases. Dr. Anna talked about psychological thinking ways that we can approach this, but there are times when it goes beyond just thinking into disease. And that is what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. We are medical practitioners, and we do look at psychological issues, but also look at what is a disease that may be going on here. And I'm going to talk about some common psychiatric diseases. Next slide. And Tina? So the way we feel is the way we think and the way we feel is determined by so many different issues. And we cannot put away the importance of our own biology. Just think of the last time you were really hungry or really thirsty or desperately needed to go to the bathroom. Could you sit and solve a math puzzle at that time? Your biological state, your drives are so important in how you feel. And major depressive disorder or clinical depression is a biological condition that we don't have the power to just think our way through and just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And that's the point I'm making here, that the brain is an organ and it has its own biology. And there are times when you cannot overcome your own biology, no more than you can fix a heart attack or an asthma attack by just thinking. Then there are social factors that go into how we are. Let me tell you a somewhat funny story. We used to visit Kerala when we were kids going from Bombay, and my grandfather told me the story. I don't know whether he was pulling my leg, but he said that his father, my great-grandfather, when he sat down to have dinner in the evenings, he would cut a mound of rice into half. The half he would eat, and the other half was cut into quarters. 1 quarter was for his wife, and 1 quarter was for his dog. Maybe he was pulling my leg, but we have to understand that we come from a traditional hierarchical social network and situation where male, female, husband, wife relationships and how we saw each other and ourselves was very structured. And we are now living in a completely different world. And this is not about blame. Please don't think that I'm pointing fingers or blaming anyone. It's just about understanding where we come from. And I know that there are so many aspects of myself that are just inherited from my father and my grandfather. And the idea here is to see how I can be a better person, a better husband, a better father by understanding my own biology, my psychology, and the social factors. Next slide, please, Tina. So some aspects of being a Malayali, as I said, we have very traditional and hierarchical roles. We often see ourselves as members of a group and not as individuals. My dad would often say, "Mansharendo pare," which translated means, "What will people say?" And that is something that bothers us a lot, how we come across as in our society, in our group. And we often think more in terms of the public aspect of things, the shame aspect, whereas in Western psychology, Freudian approaches, we think in terms of internal guilt aspects. And people from India tend to be more physically focused than psychologically minded. Let me tell you a story. It's actually a published article in the British Journal of Psychiatry from the 1980s. Some folks wondered whether major depression or depressive illness is seen in traditional societies. So they went to Nigeria, to the Yoruba tribe, and found that there are no words in that language that mean depression or sadness. And they said, does that mean they don't have depression? They found that many of the members of the tribe who they thought were depressed expressed their distress in terms of tiredness, backache, weakness, maybe a spirit taking over them, but they didn't say it in the way we understand in Western terms, sad, blue, low, unmotivated. What they did then was to treat those people, those Nigerians who expressed these symptoms, they treated them with an antidepressant from Western psychiatry, and lo and behold, all those symptoms went. The point is that major depressive disorder is a universal human phenomenon, and the way we experience it, the way we express it, may differ from culture to culture. In India, when I practiced and trained there, a lot of our people, including especially our Malayali people, would talk about backache and GI distress and headache, and would localize it to other people in their family that so-and-so is giving me trouble, I can't stand this. But behind that was clinical depression or major depression. And when they're treated, all these things go away to some extent. So just understanding that the way we experience emotional distress may be different from traditional Western understandings. Next paragraph, next slide, please. Depression is a very, very common condition. 1 in 6 Americans will have a major depressive episode in their life. And in a 12-month period of time, about 6.6% of the population will go through a depressive episode. And there are smaller episodes of depression that don't meet the full criteria in between as well. So depression is very, very common. Next slide. It is also the 4th largest cause of disease burden worldwide, 4th largest cause of disability. It's not just your personal distress, it has widespread effects on your life and the people around you. It causes job losses, behavioral problem in children of depressed parents, substance abuse, crime, homelessness, hospitalizations. There's a suicide rate up to 10%. There is marital violence and breakups. And yes, depression can cause brain damage. We have shown in chronically depressed people that there are MRI changes in the brain, and a person who is depressed has cognitive impairment to the equivalent of someone who has had 2 drinks. So you can measure the effect of depression on the brain. Point here is that major depression needs to be treated. And if it is left untreated, it can have all these effects on you, your family, your society, and your own brain. Next paragraph, next slide, please. So what are the symptoms of clinical depression? It is persistent low mood. We think of it as most of the day, every day for at least 2 weeks, where you feel down, where things don't make you feel better. Nice things don't help you feel good. There is a lack of energy. Depression is associated with changes in your sleep cycles, and you don't have refreshing or restorative sleep. And people with depression wake up tired and feel tired throughout the day. I have patients who say, I sleep 12 hours, but I'm still unrefreshed. And a lot of working people will keep their energy for work to earn their living. And when they get home, they have no energy for their family, which of course has negative effects on their children, their relationship, etc. There's also an inability to enjoy life, to take pleasure in things. Nice things that you know ought to make you feel good do not make you feel good. Sleep problems. Now let me expound on what Dr. Anna talked about. In today's world, we are going far away from the way our bodies are designed to work. we sit up and binge watch till 2 in the morning. People sit and look at computer screens and iPhone screens and television screens. Now, these screens contain a lot of blue light, which the brain mistakes as the sky. And it sets off certain circuits in your brain and make it hard for you to sleep. So if you have sleep problems, the closer you are to the cycles of the universe, sunrise, sunset, your own biorhythms, the easier it is to sleep. And the recommendation among sleep specialists is do not watch television or look at your phone for an hour before if you have trouble sleeping, because again, that light tends to confuse your brain. There is a part in the brain, the biological time clock, which is designed to read these light waves and send signals to your brain. So sleep problems, difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, poor concentration, anxiety, worry is a huge issue, feeling hopeless, feeling like you're a failure, you have not done enough, substance abuse, and often tiredness, and a wish to not go on living. Not that you want to hurt yourself, but, you know, Lord, take me. It's okay if I don't wake up. Next slide, please. So these are the features of clinical depression. And typically we would say they should last for about two weeks or more. For many people, it goes up and down for years. And if you do have these symptoms, you should ask yourself, am I just feeling sad because of COVID or because I can't work? Or is this gone from that into a medical condition? Events on the outside can trigger diseases in our own bodies, whether it's an asthma attack when you go into a moldy basement, to chronic stress leading to a major depressive episode. Another condition to keep in mind is something called generalized anxiety disorder. We all get worried. Being anxious is part of the human condition, but this is a situation where you have chronic feelings of worry, tension, going on for days, weeks, months, sometimes a whole lifetime, all the time worried, all the time tense, a sense of dread, what people say, waiting for the shoe to drop, thinking that there's something terrible about to happen. Now, this is again a case of mind-body responses. You remember the cat that Dr. Anna showed? The cat has gone into what is called the adrenaline rush or the fight or flight response. Your whole body gets keyed up waiting for an attack. And people with generalized anxiety disorder have neck, back, and shoulder pains. They have palpitations, that is your heart pounding, sweating, shortness of breath, a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms, burping, gas, diarrhea, needing to go to the bathroom many times, sleep problems, restlessness. All of this is a picture of what we call generalized anxiety disorder. The best way to understand this is that the alarm system in the brain is not able to switch off. Next slide, please. Now, there are medical consequences of chronic depression, and Dr. Anna talked about that. People who are able to find calm, peace, have much better physical conditions, and this is the mind-brain connection I talk about. The brain is part of the body, the mind-body connections, I mean. So people with depression can have a lot of somatization, i.e. the depression is converted into physical symptoms, and you go to your doctor with backache or headache or ulcer symptoms, and you get all these investigations for diseases which are not originating in your back. It starts in your head. It's not in your GI tract. It starts in your head. Now, people with depression are less compliant with medical care, whether it's for diabetes or asthma or what have you. So overall, if you have depression and a medical condition, the outcome is much poorer than if you did not have depression. In fact, the risk of mortality in MI, that is myocardial infarction, if two people have a heart attack, the one with depression is much more likely to have a repeat heart attack in 6 months. There's also high risk of strokes, blood sugar problems, etc. So the point here is that being depressed is not just an issue of suffering in your mind, it also has effects on your body and how your body handles medical conditions. Next slide, please. So coming to our current situation, the COVID shutdown and psychiatric disorders, as Dr. Amit said, it's hard to exactly quantify what this is in the short period of time, but the Mental Health of America group, who do regular screening, say there's a staggering increase in depression and anxiety, especially in younger people. Sadly, there's a global increase in spousal abuse. Domestic violence has gone up to 25% across the globe, from Japan to China to India to Europe to the US. The effect of being confined in the house with your spouse has sadly led to an increase in domestic violence. There's the stress, the fear of COVID, the uncertainty, financial worries. This can lead to anxiety disorders, and we don't have the social outlets. We go through sensory deprivation. We are not able to exercise the way we did. So this condition has certainly exacerbated underlying psychiatric conditions and brought on new cases as well. Next slide. So what do we do? First of all, to recognize the condition, to make a diagnosis, to not just shush it away, especially in our community where we do not recognize mental or psychiatric conditions as much as we ought to. I would say the first port of call, the first person to go to would be a primary care physician and get a quick medical evaluation, because there are other medical illnesses that could look like depression, that could look like generalized anxiety. Medications are very effective. Now, I just want to say that it is not whether you do medications or psychotherapy or mindfulness. It is medications and all the other interventions that Dr. Anna talked about. That's where you get the best outcome. So you take your medication, you do your exercise, you do your sleep hygiene, you get socially connected, you do go into spiritual practices, attend church, go to prayer meetings, all of that. Exercise is really wonderful. The body is designed to move, and the more we can exercise, the better our minds and bodies are. There is good evidence that aerobic exercise can slow down the progression of even Alzheimer's disease. Of course, you have to be realistic. If you have arthritis and heart disease, I'm not saying you should go and start running, within the limits of your own level of conditioning and your medical conditions. Anything you can do more than what you're doing now is good. Mindfulness, meditation, and prayer are extremely helpful. I have personally gone through some losses in my life in the last few years, and meditation and prayer have helped me. I do want to recommend two systems. I use a system called Headspace, HEADSPACE, Headspace. It's an online, it's actually an app you get on your phone. It costs like $10. There's another one called Calm, CALM, which is very helpful. It walks you through the steps of meditation, talking it out, social support, talking to your family, your friends, your church group is very helpful. And Dr. Anna had talked extensively about it. Next slide, please. So to summarize, depression is a significant cause of personal and societal dysfunction, and affects psychological and medical functioning. Asian communities, Indian communities tend to experience more of the physical symptoms like tiredness, sleep disturbances, body ache, and dysfunction. Your primary care physician would be the first person who can help you, especially with a diagnostic workup. Try some medications, exercise, mindfulness, prayer, and social and family support would help you get through this. So that's it from me. I don't know if there are any questions we can take now or later.
I don't see any at this moment. But if you want to keep an eye on the chat box, you can answer them if they come in.
Great. So let's move on to the next section we have, and it is indeed a great pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Eileen Warner-Marin. She is the Executive Director of the Eastern Pennsylvania Geriatric Society, which is a co-sponsor of this event. And this wouldn't have happened without them. Dr. Warner-Marin is the co-director of the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine's MS program in Aging and Long-Term Care Administration. She got her doctorate in health policy from the University of the Sciences and graduate degrees in gerontology from the University of Pennsylvania and health administration from St. Joseph's University, and law and social policy. She's done everything you can in terms of learning about geriatrics. I met Eileen many years ago at a Alzheimer's Association walk, and she's one of those people you think, why didn't I meet her before? She has indeed been my mentor in this, in understanding geriatrics and the way the system is set up in our tri-state area. She was smart enough to get me to join the Geriatric Society and inducted me to the board of directors as well, which is something I found very educative and fun. I've always found her smiling, calm, and always has a solution for the problems I go to her with. So Eileen is going to help you understand how to navigate the system to access services. So over to you, Eileen.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, there we go. All right. I think Tina's going to help me with my slides. So good morning, almost good afternoon to everyone. I want to begin by thanking Cherian for including me and for allowing me to share some information with you. Next slide, Tina. What I wanted to convey to you, probably most importantly, is that we'd like to think that there is a United States healthcare system. If a system is being defined as an organized delivery of healthcare, unfortunately, that you'll see, you probably already know yourself, that there is a lot of disorganization with regard to how care is provided. It's very disunified and disorganized. So we have two main groups of ways in which we can deliver care to older adults in the community. On the first tier of this slide, you'll see, as we talk about the continuum of care, we start with how we render care to community-based people. And then as we look to the very end, that red slide, we go to the most restrictive kinds of care that we can provide. So the top tier is mostly interventions that are provided by a system that a lot of physicians are not fully aware of. It's not Medicare or Medicaid. It's the Area Agency on Aging, or what we call the AAA. That money for those services doesn't come from paying into Social Security. It comes from the delivery of care from the Older Americans Act. So money coming from a separate pot of money, providing community-based services for people. Next slide, Tina. So let's just start with the very basic kind of care that a lot of older people and ourselves get. We remain in our house, and we can have one or more physicians. We try to get a primary care provider. If we're older, we try to get someone who has special fellowship or concentration in geriatrics. Unfortunately, those people are fewer and fewer because of the cost of education, the cost of medical education. As physicians get out of school, they need to recoup more money in order to pay back their school loans. And so we're seeing an increasing lack of care provided by geriatricians, a lack of people actually going into geriatrics, even though we know that the number of geriatric patients is increasing. Next, Tina. Then along our continuum of care, we have Medicare home care. And this is a benefit to people who have Medicare and also Medicaid, that you can get nurses, physical, occupational, speech therapy. You can get a home health aide. You can get some care, but it's extremely limited. And it's based on the idea that your care that you need is intermittent. But we know that this model doesn't work. We know that diabetes isn't intermittent. We know that dementia isn't intermittent. And yet we have only intermittent care provided by Medicare under this home health care benefit. So we have a disconnect between what people actually need in terms of ongoing service with what Medicare is actually going to pay for. So in order to remain in our homes and pay for our own care, some people may consider having a reverse mortgage in order to use those funds in order to stay where they are and delay or prevent themselves from going into a nursing home or in an assisted living facility. Next, thank you. So I referred a little bit earlier to the Area Agency on Aging. This is a huge benefit for people. Most people will not have to pay for any of these services. Every county across the country has an Area Agency on Aging. In Philadelphia, we call it the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. In Delaware County, we call it COSA, the County Office of Services for the Aging. But every county has its own form of services that are mandated by the state and by the federal government. And the focus is on trying to keep people in the community by providing support through having social workers come out and do care management, to have a social worker come out and do a complete assessment of their psychosocial, physical needs. They provide home delivered meals, what we know as Meals on Wheels. They may provide some home modifications in a typical Philadelphia house. In a row home, the bathroom is on the second floor, but the older person tends to be on the first floor, and going up and down the stairs can be extremely difficult. So putting in a stair glide to help get to the second floor, or putting in a bathroom for the first floor in a closet may be a helpful intervention. They also run senior centers where people could go for congregate meals, for exercise. The majority of people actually go in order to learn computer skills and to use a computer, one which they may not be able to afford on their own, but it will help them to communicate with their grandchildren. And then there's also the Division of Adult Protective Services. This is a group of social workers who are specially trained to go out and assess people who have been potentially identified as victims of abuse or neglect or financial exploitation in the community. I used to be the supervisor of Adult Protective Services in Delaware County several decades ago. And the most of the issue that we saw, the most frequent issue, was really self-neglect, where people actually were declining, and they didn't have social supports, they didn't have people checking on them, and they were not eating, they couldn't pay their bills, they were living in squalor. And we would go in and try to help with those issues. We also had several people whose spouse had advanced dementia and they were being cared for by an elderly spouse themselves, not doing that well. And we would try to provide support for both of the spouses in order to delay institutionalization and to protect the more demented or impaired spouse from physical abuse, primarily because the caregiving spouse didn't understand what the medical issues, the cognitive issues were, thinking that the behaviors were being done purposefully rather than as a consequence of their disease processes. So these kinds of services can be accessed through a telephone call to the area agency on aging of whatever county you live in. You call, you ask for information and referral. So under these COVID issues right now, the senior centers are closed, but they do have food that you can access, and they are still doing home delivered meals. And they're doing case management and assessment by telephone. Not the most effective way, but that's how they're doing it. Adult Protective Services are going out in the field personally. Next. So as an alternative to nursing home placement, you have a concept called adult daycare. I don't like the name, and if you can come up with a better name, please let us all know. We'll all be famous. But adult daycare is an alternative to nursing home placement in that a van picks the person up, takes them to a center where they get their meals, they get their personal care, medications are administered, they socialize, they can have therapy, you can even get a shower. And then at the end of the day, when the family comes home from work, the transportation brings them back home, so that they've avoided nursing home placement or delayed nursing home placement using a much cheaper alternative. Some of the county offices of aging will actually help defray the cost of adult daycare depending on the needs of the individual. So it can be very, very effective in order to delay or prevent institutionalization. Next. This actually should be the LIFE program, not the LIFT program, although maybe it does lift people up. So the LIFE program is known in Pennsylvania. It's called the PACE program in other states. Just to avoid any kind of confusion, we have a PACE program, which is our pharmaceutical benefit in Pennsylvania. So the LIFE program is for people who are eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, who would otherwise be eligible to go to a nursing home. But instead, those services are provided for them. All their medications are paid for, their medical treatments, their equipment, their transportation, using a nurse practitioner model in an adult daycare setting. So similar to what I said about the adult daycare center, the van would pick the individual up, take them to the center where they would get meals and socialization, and then go back home. If they were unable to go to the center, then home care would provide those kinds of services. And if the individual then needed to be placed in a nursing home, they would then pay for that care. So when you sign in for the PACE program in Pennsylvania, if you own any property, you as the individual, you would sign that property over to the state, and the state would recover that in most cases. If you have an apartment, then obviously you don't own your apartment, it's not a problem. So some of the barriers to people entering the PACE program are that they want to give their house to their family member. They wouldn't be able to do that, and they'd have to give up their primary care provider and sign out of regular Medicare and sign into this program. So for a lot of people, it really does work. It doesn't work at 2 o'clock in the morning if you have to go to the bathroom. There's really nobody else there that's going to help you. But for a number of people, it really is an alternative to placement. Next. We have assisted living or personal care homes in Pennsylvania, labeled as such in Pennsylvania. Most are called personal care homes because the assisted living moniker is a little bit more onerous to the facilities. So this is 100% private pay. The government, the state, the federal government doesn't pay for any of this care. It costs generally $4,000 to $8,000 a month, sometimes even greater. And there's usually not a registered nurse on every shift. It's mostly medication aides and other people providing care in a more of a social model. Here's your house, here's your housing, your food, your housekeeping services, but any kind of Medicare, medical care would be rendered by home health services instead. Next. Then we have the short-term rehabilitation where Medicare will pay for up to 100 days in a skilled nursing facility, what we used to call a nursing home. And just one caveat for you, if you're thinking of nursing home placement, if you're thinking of finding a nursing home, now's the time to really know what's available in your neighborhood. You do not want to choose a nursing home based on location, location, location. That's how you buy a piece of real estate, but that's not how you select a nursing home. The federal government has a website, Medicare.gov, where you can look for a nursing home on their 5-star rating to see if you can compare various facilities in the area that may have better care. But it can give you some false information. So you really want to go to a facility. You want to go unannounced. You want to go at lunch. You want to see how people are being given their food. You want to see how people are being cared for. You want to see how people are groomed. But not during COVID, because you're not allowed in. And COVID has really changed how nursing homes are rendering care. People are frightened to go to nursing homes because, as you may remember, in the beginning, it seemed that our largest groups of people dying were in nursing homes. And there was a lot of negative attention paid to nursing homes, thinking that there was something that the nursing home industry was doing incorrectly that caused the spread and the death of people in facilities. And in some cases, in many cases, the COVID actually came in to the nursing home via their employees or from dialysis patients, because we really didn't pay much attention to what infection control practices were being done in the dialysis setting. But what you'll see is that Medicare pays for very little care, only if the person has skilled care, if the person has the diagnosis of dementia, doesn't have wounds or IVs, or doesn't need physical or occupational therapy, the benefit is almost nothing. So then we go to more long-term care. Next slide, please. Which would be long-term care facilities either paid for out of pocket, $6,000 to $8,000 to $12,000 per month, or we apply for a Medicaid grant to pay for that care. So again, if Medicaid is paying for our nursing home stay and we have property, then the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will revert to that home ownership for the payment. And so long-term care facilities, we have about 900 of them just in Pennsylvania. They vary in quality, and you really want to go check out how things are being done, either remotely or by looking at the website, just to get a sense. A lot of times the hospital is interested in moving the person out of the hospital as soon as possible, and the first available bed may not be the best choice for your individual family member. So we have to make sure that we do our homework and not just relying on the discharge planner to tell us where the person should be going. And next slide. A higher level of care would be a long-term acute care hospital where people who have very complex needs, people who are on ventilators who are have difficulty weaning from a ventilator, need complex treatments, or long-term intravenous antibiotics would go to an LTAC for care. And then finally, the highest level of care would be an acute care hospital. And just to keep in mind that the longer you stay in the hospital, generally, the less the hospital gets paid based on a change in reimbursement that was finalized in 1987. So we know that hospitals are interested in discharging people as quickly as possible, but they may be penalized if the person comes back to their hospital or some other hospital within 30 days. So be really careful about discharge planning. Make sure that people understand that they have to have everything in place, that if somebody needs an appointment with the physician, that the physician's appointment is made before the person leaves the hospital, and that the transportation is arranged before the person leaves the hospital. We know that a lot of people will be discharged back to the hospital within less than 30 days, having never seen any physician during that period of time. So we want to make sure that there's continuity of care. Next. So we know that for most of the care that's being provided to older adults, it comes from the Medicare benefit. Medicaid may be available also to supplement people for what Medicare doesn't pay for the 20% of the cost of what Medicare doesn't pay for. So if you are income eligible, you may be able to get on Medicaid. When we had the Affordable Care Act first launched, it was through Medicaid expansion. Some politicians who are not running right now had actually advocated for Medicare for all as a way of trying to even the playing field for everyone. Apparently that's off the table right now, but ways to improve the delivery of care, the coordination of care, and for people to understand what their benefits are, both for the Medicare, Medicaid, and for the AAA system are really important. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of this information is not well known in the community. And next, back one. So this is just a schematic of what Medicare pays for. Medicare Part A, we think of the hospitals and somewhat in nursing homes and in home care. Medicare Part B pays for physicians, labs, x-rays, outpatient, but again, only 80%. Medicare Part C is a separate Medicare that we ask for. It's an advantage program. And Medicare Part D is the drug benefit that we have a donut hole that was supposed to be fixed by the Affordable Care Act, but with the changes made to the ACA, we're still seeing large amounts of money being used for prescription drugs, and very ineffective way to be able to provide care for people. Lastly, we see that there are social determinants of healthcare, that where we live in our neighborhood, what zip code we live in, dictates how much economic stability we have, dictates whether we'll go to college at all, whether we'll graduate from high school at all, and whether if we don't have a good education, we may not have a job that gives us healthcare benefits, which then limits our social and community links, which then limits our ability to access meaningful healthcare and preventative services. So we see a lot of excess diabetes, hypertension, obesity, renal disease, all kinds of chronic medical issues when we have people who don't have the ability to access healthcare because it starts in the neighborhood. And lastly, Tina, I have a question slide for anyone. Have there been any questions to this point?
Let me take a look. Not at this point. No questions. So I'll keep an eye on that. So as Sherry finishes up, but Eileen, great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. That was really a good summary of a very, very complex and, as we know, somewhat dysfunctional system. And I hope we can learn to navigate that, and that maybe there would be some change coming in the way the system is set up and practiced. So here we are towards the end of a long and informative morning. I just want to reiterate that we'll try and make these resources available to the various parishes and the slide decks as well, so you can access the services that have been talked about, especially Dr. Anna's very useful and comprehensive talk. We'll also make this recording available so that parishes can put it on their website if they so choose to. I will now call upon Reverend Abraham Kuruvilla, my own pastor at the Delaware Marthoma Church, to make some concluding remarks and lead us in prayer. Manuachan, are you there?
Yeah, I think the video has to be enabled.
Yes. Tina, can you enable Reverend Kuruvilla's video?
I think it's Abraham's iPhone.
Oh, it's Abraham's iPhone. There you go. We can see you.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I want to really thank everyone who are, part of this meeting today. As Prakash mentioned, we had planned something other than this in March, and we had discussed about this, and all of this came into fruition today. I want to thank all the Achans who coordinated and made the efforts. I want to thank the attendees. I think today we had about 120 devices logged in. That means at least 200 or close to 200 participants were there. So all the attendees who made time today morning, especially I want to thank Prakash for coordinating this whole effort with Matthew Uncle from Philadelphia Marthoma Church, with the team of experts that we had today. It was Prakash who coordinated all of them. And to thank Dr. Anna, Dr. Amit, to thank Dr. Eileen, and to thank also Tina for taking care of the Zoom technical aspects. That's a very major issue, I think, taking care of the technical aspect. I want to thank the Southeast RAC, especially Sean, who called up people, and a lot of other members work here, Uncle. And to thank the Philadelphia Marthoma Church, especially the seniors coordinator, Matthew Uncle, and to thank the Kadosh Media team who are like telecasting this on Facebook, all these 2 hours, especially Tiju George, Christy Matthew, Abhinash, Kumbuon, Santosh Abraham, and Justin Jose. And to thank all of you who were a part of it. Like last in March, me and Prakash, we were discussing that we have resources with us among our community to make available on a very wider scale. And last March, like I was scheduled to get transferred in April, and March, because of the COVID, the seniors meeting didn't happen. But thanks be to God, today through Zoom, we have about 200 seniors who attended this throughout the meeting. And me and Prakash, we were thinking about more such things in the future, God willingly. we would be able to do it. I want to really thank the information overload that we had today. It was so much overload of information, but it was very well said. And to thank God Almighty for everything. If nobody has any questions, I will end it with a word of prayer. Okay, let's bow down for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you and we thank you for this wonderful time that you've given us today morning to come in your presence and to figure out the psychological challenges during this time of COVID. As your creation, we have our own strengths, we have our own weakness, and oh Lord, this avenue was a time where we come together as community from different backgrounds and share together and survive together and thrive together in your grace and in your mercy, O Lord. Lord, we want to thank you for everyone who are part of it, O Lord Jesus. May we pray, O Lord, that they use their resources more for the betterment of society, and through events such as this, we have understood that we are strong together during this fight against COVID, and we survive more stronger together, O Lord. Today's meeting was a witness to that fact, O Lord. Help us to go forward in your spirit and in your grace. Be with us, O Lord, in the coming days, in the coming months. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. May the love, grace, and peace of the triune God be with us now and forevermore. Amen. Okay, Prakash.
And hopefully this is something we can all practice. Thank you, Jinwachan and Matthew Uncle.
Thank you, Dr. Charian, for arranging everything.
I would also thank Jinwachan, by the way.
Okay, no problem.
Again, we will disseminate all the information to the various members. If Jinwachan and Manuachan can let me know, who we could email these to. I will work with Tina and we will get this out in the next couple of days. And I do hope that this has been a blessing and a source of strength, and that we can all join hands, secular and religious communities, and just bring our common humanity out. Thank you all.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.